On the morning of July 15, 1943, the body of a German prisoner of war was discovered in a wooded area, approximately 400 yards from the main compound of Camp Hearne, Texas. The official cause of death was listed as accidental. The case was closed within 72 hours. But the guards who worked the night shift knew something was wrong. The story they were told didn't match what they had seen. And in the months that followed, something began happening in those woods. Something that has never been explained. My name is David Richardson, and this is the story of Camp Hearne, a World War II prisoner of war facility that held over 4,000 German soldiers in the remote pine forests of central Texas. It's a story of injustice, violence, and a presence that, according to dozens of witnesses over 8 decades, still walks those woods at night. This is a story where the official record ends, but the truth may still be searching for a voice. Camp Hearne was established in January 1943, approximately 12 miles north of the town of Hearne, Texas, in Robertson County. The location was chosen for its isolation. Dense pine forest, summer heat that could reach 105 degrees. The nearest significant population center, Bryan College Station, was 20 miles away. The camp sprawled across 700 acres of forest and cleared land. It contained 3 main compounds, each capable of housing over 1,000 prisoners. Guard towers at regular intervals, administrative buildings, a hospital, recreation facilities. The perimeter was secured by double barbed wire fencing and regular patrols. By May 1943, Camp Hearne held approximately 4,800 German prisoners of war, primarily captured in North Africa and the early stages of the Italian campaign. Among them were soldiers from elite units, Afrika Korps veterans, Luftwaffe personnel, and U-boat crews. The camp was commanded by Colonel Howard Kelsey, a career Army officer with a reputation for strict but fair administration. Security was overseen by Captain Vincent Mallory, a former military police investigator from Pennsylvania. Life in the camp followed the protocols established by the Geneva Convention. Prisoners received adequate food, medical care, and were allowed to work in civilian labor programs, primarily agricultural work in the surrounding counties. Mail was delivered. Red Cross packages arrived regularly. Educational and recreational programs were established. But beneath this surface of routine military administration, tensions simmered. Not all prisoners were cooperative. Not all guards were professional. And in the summer of 1943, those tensions would explode into violence. Corporal Johannes Berger was 26 years old, from a small village near Munich. He had been a school teacher before the war. Captured in Tunisia in April 1943, he arrived at Camp Hearne in early June. According to fellow prisoners, Berger was quiet, well-educated, and deeply opposed to the Nazi regime. He refused to participate in the informal Nazi hierarchy that existed within the prisoner population. He openly criticized Hitler. He befriended American guards and learned English quickly. This made him a target. Within the prisoner compounds, hardcore Nazi loyalists maintained control through intimidation. They enforced discipline, punished those they considered traitors, and maintained a command structure parallel to official camp administration. Berger's refusal to conform marked him as dangerous. Fellow prisoners later testified that he had received threats. He had been assaulted twice in the barracks, beaten severely enough to require medical treatment. Camp administration was aware of the situation. On July 10, 1943, Berger requested protective custody, asking to be transferred to a separate compound or to a different camp entirely. His request was logged and forwarded to Colonel Kelsey. A decision was pending. 4 days later, On July 14th, Berger worked an agricultural detail approximately 3 miles from the camp, supervised by 2 guards, Sergeant Raymond Foster and Private Leon Hutchins, both from Texas. The work crew returned to camp at 1730 hours. Evening roll call was conducted at 1800 hours. Johannes Berger was present and accounted for. At 2100 hours, he was not. The first alarm was raised at 21:15 hours when Berger failed to return from the latrine. A search of Compound B, where he was housed, found no trace of him. At 21:30 hours, Captain Mallory ordered a full camp lockdown and initiated search protocols. Guard tower logs were reviewed. No prisoner had been observed approaching the perimeter fence. No breach of the wire had been detected. Weather conditions that evening were clear. Visibility was good, and multiple tower guards had maintained overlapping observation zones. Yet somehow, Johannes Berger had left the compound. Search teams were deployed immediately. Spotlights swept the camp interior. Dogs were brought in. The surrounding forest was searched systematically. At 16:20 hours the following morning, July 15th, Berger's body was discovered by Private Daniel Shaw, a guard assigned to the Eastern Perimeter Patrol. The location was approximately 400 yards northeast of Compound B, in a densely wooded area of pine and oak trees. The body was lying face down in a shallow ravine. Camp physician Major Robert Kensington was called to the scene. His preliminary examination, conducted on site, noted the following: multiple contusions on the face and head, fracture of the left arm, lacerations on both hands, significant trauma to the back of the skull. Time of death estimated between 2200 and 0100 hours. Major Kensington's initial assessment suggested the injuries were consistent with a fall from height, possibly from a guard tower, or while attempting to climb the perimeter fence. But several guards who saw the body that morning noticed something the official report didn't emphasize. The injuries to Berger's hands appeared defensive. The pattern of bruising on his face suggested he had been struck repeatedly. And most significantly, there were marks on his wrists consistent with being restrained. Private Shaw, who discovered the body, later testified in a closed hearing that he observed what appeared to be boot prints in the soft earth near the body. The prints suggested at least 2 individuals, possibly 3, had been at the location. Photographs were taken. Evidence was collected. The body was transported to the camp morguery. By 1400 hours that afternoon, the official determination had been made: accidental death during an unauthorized escape attempt. The case was closed. Johannes Berger was buried in the prisoner of war cemetery section of the Post Cemetery at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. His family in Germany was notified through Red Cross channels. No criminal investigation was conducted. No guards were questioned beyond routine incident reports. No prisoners were charged. But Private Shaw wasn't the only one who knew something was wrong. On the night of July 20th, 5 days after Berger's death, Private Eugene Walters was assigned to Tower 6, which overlooked the eastern perimeter, the area closest to where the body had been found. At approximately 02:45 hours, Walters observed movement in the tree line, approximately 60 yards beyond the perimeter fence. He activated the tower spotlight and illuminated the area. A figure was standing at the edge of the trees. Male, medium build, wearing what appeared to be prisoner's clothing. Walters immediately radioed the guard command post. Tower 6 to command. Possible escapee observed outside perimeter, eastern sector. Grid reference Echo 4. Request immediate response. Sergeant Foster, the officer of the watch that night, acknowledged and dispatched a patrol team. Walters kept the spotlight trained on the figure. It didn't move. It stood motionless, partially obscured by trees, but clearly visible in the beam of light. The patrol team arrived within 4 minutes. 3 guards, armed, with flashlights and a tracking dog. They reached the tree line. The spotlight from Tower 6 still illuminated the area. The figure was gone. The patrol searched for 30 minutes. They found no footprints, no disturbance of the undergrowth, no indication anyone had been there. Private Walters was interviewed by Sergeant Foster. His account was clear and consistent. He had observed a figure for approximately 4 minutes, under direct illumination, at a distance of approximately 60 yards. Sergeant Foster logged the incident as a possible visual misidentification. But 3 nights later, it happened again. Between July 23 and August 15, 1943, 11 separate sightings of an unidentified figure were reported by guards at Camp Hearne. All sightings occurred at night, between 0200 and 0400 hours. All occurred in the vicinity of the eastern perimeter, within approximately 200 yards of where Johannes Berger's body had been discovered. All described a solitary figure, male, wearing prisoner's clothing, standing motionless or walking slowly through the trees. In every case, when guards approached or illuminated the area, the figure disappeared. On August 3, 1943, 2 guards, Corporal James Mitchell and Private Robert Hayes, observed the figure simultaneously from different positions. Both provided independent descriptions that matched exactly. Approximately 5 feet 9 inches tall, slender build, wearing gray trousers and a light-colored shirt consistent with prisoner-issue clothing. Mitchell and Hayes approached the location from opposite directions, intending to corner the figure. They maintained radio contact throughout the approach. Both men reached the tree line within seconds of each other. They were less than 40 feet apart. The figure had vanished. There was nowhere to hide. The undergrowth was sparse. Visibility was adequate with flashlights, and the 2 guards had converging lines of sight that covered the entire area. The figure had simply ceased to exist. Captain Mallory personally interviewed both guards. He found their testimony credible but could offer no explanation. By mid-August, rumors were circulating throughout the guard detachment. Some guards requested reassignment from night duty. Others refused to patrol the eastern perimeter alone. The prisoners had heard the rumors too, and some of them began to talk. On August 18, 1943, a German prisoner named Friedrich Weber requested a meeting with camp administration. Weber was a corporal, a veteran of the Africa Corps, and one of the few prisoners willing to communicate openly with American authorities. He was interviewed by Captain Mallory with a translator present. Weber stated that the prisoner population believed Johannes Berger had not died accidentally. They believed he had been murdered, either by fellow prisoners or by American guards, and that his body had been placed in the woods to simulate an escape attempt gone wrong. Captain Mallory asked if Weber had evidence to support this claim. Weber said no, only rumors. But he added something that made Mallory take careful notes. Weber said that on the night of July 14th, the night Berger disappeared, he had been awakened by sounds of a struggle in the barracks. Muffled voices, the sound of someone being restrained. When he looked, Berger's bunk was empty. Weber had assumed Berger was using the latrine. He went back to sleep. The next morning, Berger was gone. Weber stated that several other prisoners had similar recollections, but none were willing to provide formal statements. Fear of retaliation from the Nazi-aligned prisoners made testimony too dangerous. Captain Mallory documented Weber's statement and forwarded it to Colonel Kelsey with a recommendation for further investigation. The recommendation was denied. The official position remained: accidental death during escape attempt. Case closed. But something else happened after that meeting with Weber. The sightings changed. On the night of August 22, 1943, Private Thomas Bradley was conducting a foot patrol of the eastern perimeter when he encountered the figure standing directly in his path, approximately 20 feet away. Bradley froze. He raised his flashlight. The figure was facing him. In the beam of the flashlight, Bradley could see the face clearly. He later described it as pale, almost gray. The eyes were dark, hollow. The expression was what Bradley described as desperate, pleading. The figure's mouth moved, as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. Bradley stood paralyzed for what he estimated was 10 to 15 seconds. Then he reached for his radio. In the moment he looked down, the figure vanished. Bradley reported the incident immediately. He was examined by the camp physician, who found his vital signs elevated, consistent with acute stress, but otherwise normal. Bradley was a combat veteran. He had served in the Pacific before being reassigned to Camp Hearne. He was not prone to panic or imagination. Captain Mallory interviewed him personally. Bradley's statement included one detail that changed everything. He said he recognized the face. He had been one of the guards present when Johannes Berger's body was discovered on July 15th. He had seen the face, despite the injuries. He was certain. The figure he encountered on the night of August 22nd was Johannes Berger. The incident with Private Bradley marked a turning point. Previously, sightings had been brief, ambiguous, easily dismissed as visual misidentification or psychological stress. But Bradley's testimony was detailed, specific, and came from a credible witness who directly connected the apparition to the deceased prisoner. Captain Mallory made a decision that violated standard protocol. He initiated an unofficial investigation into the death of Johannes Berger. Working discreetly, Mallory interviewed guards who had been on duty the night of July 14th. He reviewed tower logs, patrol schedules, and incident reports. He examined photographs taken at the scene where the body was discovered. He found inconsistencies. The official timeline stated that Berger was discovered missing at 21:15 hours. But tower logs showed unusual radio traffic between 20:30 and 2100 hours, communications that had been redacted from the official incident report. Photographs of the scene showed disturbance of the ground consistent with multiple individuals, as Private Shaw had originally reported. But these observations were not included in the final investigation summary. And most significantly, Mallory discovered that Sergeant Raymond Foster, who had supervised Berger's work detail on July 14th, had been involved in 2 previous incidents involving physical altercations with prisoners. Captain Mallory compiled his findings into a confidential report and submitted it to Colonel Kelsey on September 1st, 1943. The report recommended reopening the investigation into Berger's death and conducting formal interrogations of specific personnel. On September 5, 1943, Captain Vincent Mallory was transferred to a training facility in New Jersey, effective immediately. His report was classified and filed. The investigation was not reopened, but the sightings continued. Between September 1943 and June 1945, when Camp Hearne was officially closed and all prisoners were repatriated to Europe, over 40 separate incidents were logged involving unexplained sightings in the eastern perimeter woods. Guards described consistent phenomena. A figure in prisoner's clothing, always in the same general area, always at night, often appearing to be searching for something, looking at the ground, moving slowly through the trees. Some guards reported hearing sounds, not voices exactly, more like exhalations of breath, the sound of someone struggling. On 3 occasions, guards reported finding disturbed earth in the ravine where Berger's body had been discovered, as if someone had been digging. Each time, a search of the area revealed nothing buried. The final documented sighting at Camp Hearne occurred on June 8, 1945, 3 days before the facility was officially decommissioned. Lieutenant Paul Anderson was conducting a final security sweep of the grounds when he observed the figure standing at the exact location where Berger's body had been found, nearly 2 years earlier. Lieutenant Anderson was an experienced officer. He was not superstitious. He approached to within 15 feet. The figure looked directly at him. Anderson later stated the expression was one of profound sadness, but also something else. Accusation. As if the figure was saying, without words, "You know what happened to me. Why has nothing been done?" Then the figure turned and walked deeper into the woods, disappearing into darkness. Lieutenant Anderson did not pursue. He completed his sweep and filed his final report. Among his recommendations was a notation that the eastern perimeter woods be clearly marked on camp decommission documents with a note, "Area of unexplained phenomena. Recommend continued observation if property is repurposed for military use." The recommendation was ignored. After World War II, Camp Hearne was dismantled. Most structures were removed or sold. The land was returned to private ownership and eventually incorporated into a patchwork of agricultural properties and undeveloped forest. For decades, the story of Camp Hearne was largely forgotten. A footnote in local history. A few elderly residents of Hearne remembered the camp, but most of the details faded into obscurity. Then, in 1982, two hunters named Carl Jenkins and Michael Patterson were tracking deer in a wooded area north of Hearne when they encountered something they couldn't explain. It was approximately 05:30 hours, just before dawn. They were moving quietly through the trees when they saw a man standing approximately 50 yards ahead, partially obscured by vegetation. The man was wearing outdated clothing, gray and light-colored, that looked nothing like modern hunting gear. Jenkins called out, assuming it was another hunter. The man turned, looked directly at them, then walked behind a large oak tree. Jenkins and Patterson approached immediately. They reached the tree within seconds. No one was there. The undergrowth beyond was dense enough that any movement would have been visible and audible. The man had vanished. Jenkins and Patterson marked the location and returned the following day in daylight. They searched the area thoroughly. They found remnants of concrete foundations partially overgrown with vegetation, rusted fence posts, fragments of barbed wire. Research at the local library revealed they had been hunting in what used to be the eastern perimeter of Camp Hearne. Approximately 400 yards from where they encountered the figure, they found a shallow ravine. Carl Jenkins is now 73 years old. I interviewed him last month at his home in Bryan, Texas. He's a retired engineer, rational and precise in his thinking. I asked him if he believed in ghosts. He said, "I didn't. Not before that morning. But I know what I saw. And I know that man was wearing the same kind of clothing I've seen in old photographs of German prisoners. And I know he disappeared in a way that has no rational explanation." In 1995, researchers from Texas A&M University conducted a historical preservation survey of the former Camp Hearne site. They documented the few remaining physical traces of the camp, interviewed local residents, and compiled archived military records. Their report included a section on local folklore and oral history. Among the stories collected was a persistent legend about a ghost in the woods, described as the spirit of a German prisoner who was murdered and whose death was covered up by military authorities. The researchers noted that multiple independent sources, including individuals with no connection to each other, told essentially the same story, with remarkably consistent details. In 2006, the Texas Historical Commission installed a marker at the site of Camp Hearne, commemorating its role in World War II history. The marker makes no mention of Johannes Berger or the unexplained phenomena reported in the eastern woods. But locals know. Ask anyone in Hearne over the age of 60 about the prisoner's ghost, and you'll hear the story. Some details vary, but the core narrative remains constant. A German prisoner was killed unjustly. His death was covered up, and his spirit still walks the woods, searching for justice that was never delivered. In 2019, I obtained declassified documents from the National Archives relating to Camp Hearne. Among hundreds of pages of routine administrative records, supply inventories, and personnel rosters, I found something significant. Captain Vincent Mallory's September 1943 confidential report. It had been classified secret and buried in archived files for 76 years. It was declassified in 2018 as part of a routine document release. The report is 23 pages long. It details everything Captain Mallory discovered during his unofficial investigation. He concluded that Johannes Berger was almost certainly murdered. Mallory believed Berger was removed from his barracks by fellow prisoners, handed over to American guards who were sympathetic to the Nazi-aligned prisoner leadership, beaten severely, and his body placed in the woods to simulate a failed escape attempt. Mallory specifically named Sergeant Raymond Foster as a suspect. He documented Foster's history of violence toward prisoners and noted that Foster had been on duty the night Berger disappeared. Mallory's report recommended criminal prosecution of Foster and at least 3 German prisoners identified as hardcore Nazi enforcers within the camp population. None of his recommendations were implemented. Foster was never charged. He served out his time at Camp Hearne and was honorably discharged in 1946. The German prisoners Mallory identified were repatriated to Germany after the war. Their fates are unknown. Johannes Berger's death remained officially classified as accidental until I found Captain Mallory's report in 2019. The truth had been there, in an archived file, for over 7 decades. Documented, detailed, conclusive, and ignored. I made one final trip to the former site of Camp Hearne last October. The eastern woods where the sightings occurred are on private property, but I obtained permission from the landowner to visit the location. It's dense forest now, pine and oak, thick undergrowth. The ravine where Berger's body was found is still there, a natural depression in the land that fills with water during heavy rain. I spent 4 hours there during daylight, walking the area, taking photographs, trying to understand what happened in this place 80 years ago. The forest was quiet, birds, wind in the trees. Nothing unusual. As I was preparing to leave, approximately 17:30 hours, I noticed something. In the ravine, the undergrowth was disturbed, not in a natural pattern. It looked like someone had been digging. The exposed soil was fresh. I examined the area carefully. There were no footprints, no tool marks, just disturbed earth, as if hands had been clawing at the ground. I don't know what to make of that. I documented it with photographs and left. So, what really happened to Johannes Berger on the night of July 14, 1943? Based on Captain Mallory's investigation, the evidence is compelling. Berger was murdered by individuals within Camp Hearne, either fellow prisoners or American guards, or both. His body was staged to appear as an escape attempt gone wrong. The murder was covered up by military authorities who prioritized operational security over justice. The subsequent phenomena, the dozens of sightings over 8 decades, are more difficult to explain. Collective hallucination, mass suggestion, environmental factors that create visual anomalies? Perhaps. But the consistency of the reports, across decades, from independent witnesses with no knowledge of previous incidents, suggests something more. Carl Jenkins, the hunter I interviewed, said something that stayed with me. I think some injustices are so profound that they leave a mark on a place, not just in records or memories, but in the place itself. Something stays, something that won't rest until the truth is acknowledged. Maybe he's right. Maybe justice delayed really is justice denied, in ways we don't fully understand. Johannes Berger has no descendants. He never married. His parents died during the war. There is no one left in Germany who remembers him personally. His grave at Fort Sam Houston is maintained by the Department of Veterans Affairs. It's a simple marker: name, rank, date of death. It says nothing about how he died, nothing about the cover-up, nothing about the ghost story that has persisted for 80 years. But now, Captain Mallory's report is in the public record. The truth is documented. The injustice is acknowledged. Will that be enough? I don't know. But I'd like to think that somewhere in those quiet woods north of Hearne, Texas, maybe someone can finally rest. This has been an investigation into the death of Johannes Berger and the unexplained phenomena at Camp Hearne, Texas. All information presented is based on military records, witness testimony, and historical documentation. Captain Vincent Mallory died in 1987. Before his death, he told his family he had tried to do the right thing at Camp Hearne. He said he hoped someday the truth would come out. It took 76 years, but it did. On the night of March 17, 1946, Corporal James Whitfield was walking the perimeter fence of what used to be the Papago Park prisoner of war camp, just outside Phoenix, Arizona. The camp had been officially closed for 3 months. Most of the structures had been dismantled. The guard towers stood empty. But Corporal Whitfield wasn't alone. What he saw that night would be documented in a military incident report that remained buried in Army archives for decades. And his experience was only the beginning of a mystery that, to this day, has never been adequately explained. My name is Michael Torres, and this is the story of the German prisoners of war who came to the Arizona desert during World War II, and the question that still haunts that empty desert ground. Did some of them never really leave? In the spring of 1943, the United States Army established a prisoner of war facility at Papago Park, approximately 7 miles east of downtown Phoenix. The location seemed almost absurd. Arizona, the Sonoran Desert, summer temperatures regularly exceeding 115 degrees Fahrenheit. But that was exactly the point. The camp was designed to hold German and Italian prisoners of war captured in North Africa and Europe. The theory was simple. The harsh desert environment would discourage escape attempts. Where would they go? The nearest Mexican border was over 180 miles south, through some of the most unforgiving terrain in North America. By November 1944, the camp housed over 3,000 German prisoners, primarily from the Africa Corps and U-boat crews. Among them were some of Germany's most experienced soldiers and officers. The camp consisted of 6 compounds, each surrounded by barbed wire fencing, guard towers at each corner, barracks constructed of wood and canvas, a hospital, administrative buildings. The facility sprawled across 600 acres of desert scrubland, backed against the rocky foothills of the Papago Buttes. Life in the camp was, by prisoner of war standards, relatively humane. The Geneva Convention was strictly observed. Prisoners received adequate food, medical care, and were allowed to work in agricultural labor programs in exchange for small wages. But it was still a prison, and some men could not accept that. On the night of December 23, 1944, 25 German officers executed what remains one of the most sophisticated escape attempts in American military history. They had spent 3 months digging a tunnel. It began beneath a coal bin in Compound 1A, descended 15 feet underground, and extended 178 feet to emerge beyond the outer perimeter fence, concealed by desert brush. The tunnel was an engineering marvel. Reinforced with bed slats, ventilated with a system of pipes made from powdered milk cans, lit by electrical wiring stolen from camp lighting systems. On that December night, the 25 men crawled through the tunnel and disappeared into the Arizona desert. The escape wasn't discovered until morning roll call. What followed was the largest manhunt in Arizona history. The FBI, Army intelligence, local law enforcement, border patrol, and hundreds of civilian volunteers combed the desert. Roadblocks were established, train stations were monitored, the Mexican border was sealed. Within 2 weeks, all 25 escapees were recaptured. Most were found within 50 miles of the camp, dehydrated and disoriented. 3 made it as far as the railroad yards in Yuma. One officer, Captain Jürgen Wattenberg, a decorated U-boat commander, was found hiding in a cave in the Harquahala Mountains, over 80 miles west of Phoenix. They were returned to Papago Park. Security was increased. The tunnel was destroyed. No one died during the escape, but according to military records, 3 German prisoners did die at Papago Park between 1943 and 1945. Private First Class Heinrich Baumann, age 24, died of heat stroke on July 8, 1943. Sergeant Klaus Richter, age 29, died of pneumonia on January 15, 1944. And Corporal Otto Krause, age 31, died under circumstances officially listed as accidental drowning in an irrigation canal near the camp perimeter on August 3, 1944. 3 deaths in 2 years, out of over 3,000 prisoners. Statistically unremarkable. But here's where the story becomes strange. The first documented incident occurred on September 19, 1944, approximately 6 weeks after Otto Krause's death. Private Daniel Martinez, a 21-year-old guard from New Mexico, was assigned to Tower 3, the northeast corner of Compound 1A. It was 02:45 hours. The temperature had dropped to a tolerable 68 degrees. Private Martinez later testified that he observed a figure walking along the inner perimeter fence, approximately 40 yards from his tower. The figure was wearing what appeared to be a prisoner's uniform, gray trousers, light-colored shirt. Martinez called out the required challenge in German. "Halt! Identify yourself!" The figure did not respond. It continued walking, moving parallel to the fence at a steady pace. Martinez raised his rifle and repeated the challenge. No response. The figure walked to the corner of the fence, turned, and walked back the way it had come. Martinez activated the spotlight on his tower, illuminating the area. The figure vanished. Not ran, not dove for cover. Simply vanished, as if it had never been there. Private Martinez immediately radioed the command post. Within 3 minutes, Sergeant Robert Holloway and 2 guards arrived at the location. They searched the area thoroughly. They found no one. More significantly, they found no footprints. The ground in that area was soft sand. Anyone walking there would have left clear tracks. There were none. Private Martinez was questioned extensively. He had no history of mental health issues. He didn't drink. He was considered reliable. His account never changed. The incident was logged and filed. 3 weeks later, it happened again. On October 11, 1944, at approximately 01:30 hours, Corporal William Hayes was conducting a routine foot patrol along the southern perimeter when he encountered a prisoner outside the compound fence. The man was standing motionless, facing the Papago Buttes, approximately 20 feet beyond the outer wire. Corporal Hayes drew his weapon and ordered the man to raise his hands and identify himself. The prisoner turned slowly. Corporal Hayes would later describe the man's face as pale, almost gray. His expression was blank. His uniform appeared old, faded, as if it had been worn for months without washing. Hayes repeated his command. The prisoner took 1 step forward, then stopped. Hayes raised his rifle and prepared to fire a warning shot. The prisoner smiled. Not a friendly smile. Hayes described it as sad, almost apologetic. Then the man turned and walked directly toward a section of desert scrub about 30 feet away. Hayes called for backup and pursued. When he reached the scrub, the prisoner was gone. There was nowhere to hide. The vegetation was sparse. Hayes had a clear view in all directions. The man had simply disappeared. A search team was deployed immediately. They found no trace of anyone, no footprints, no disturbance of the ground, no evidence anyone had been there. Corporal Hayes was interviewed by Captain Theodore Morrison, the camp's intelligence officer. Morrison was skeptical, but he noted that Hayes was a combat veteran who had served in the Pacific. He was not prone to panic or imagination. Captain Morrison logged the incident and added a note. Recommend increased night patrols and psychological evaluation of guard personnel. But the incidents continued. Between October 1944 and March 1946, 17 separate sightings were reported by guards at Papago Park. The descriptions were remarkably consistent. A solitary figure in prisoner's clothing, always observed at night, between 0100 and 0400 hours. Always appearing within or just outside the camp perimeter. Never speaking, never reacting to commands, disappearing without trace. Some guards reported the figure appeared to be searching for something, walking slowly, looking at the ground. Others described the figure as simply standing, motionless, facing the mountains. In 3 instances, multiple guards witnessed the same figure simultaneously from different positions, eliminating the possibility of individual hallucination. On January 8, 1945, Lieutenant Frank Bishop, the officer of the watch, personally observed the figure from the command post. He grabbed binoculars and observed for approximately 90 seconds before the figure vanished. His report stated, "The subject appeared solid and 3-dimensional, not transparent or indistinct. Clothing consistent with POW issue. Distance approximately 70 yards. Clear night. Full moon. Excellent visibility. Subject disappeared instantaneously. No rational explanation available." By March 1945, the sightings had become so frequent that informal protocols developed. Guards who witnessed the figure were instructed to observe and report, but not to pursue or attempt physical contact. The prisoners knew about the sightings. Word had spread through the compounds. Some of the German prisoners claimed to have seen the figure as well, though they were reluctant to discuss it with their captors. A German corporal named Dieter Schultz, who spoke fluent English, told an American guard that the figure was known among the prisoners as der Wächter, the Watcher. When asked who they thought it was, several prisoners mentioned Otto Krause. Otto Krause had been a corporal in the Wehrmacht's 21st Panzer Division, captured in Tunisia in May 1943. He arrived at Papago Park in August 1943. By all accounts, he was a quiet man, reserved. He kept to himself and rarely participated in the camp's recreational activities. Other prisoners described him as homesick, frequently talking about his family in Bavaria. On the evening of August 2, 1944, Krause requested permission to work in one of the agricultural details the following morning. This was unusual, as he typically avoided outdoor labor during the summer heat. Permission was granted. On the morning of August 3, Krause reported to the work detail. The group of 12 prisoners was escorted by 2 guards to an irrigation canal approximately half a mile from the main camp, where they were assigned to clear debris from the water flow. At approximately 10:15 hours, one of the guards noticed Krause was missing. A search was initiated immediately. At 11:45 hours, Krause's body was found in the irrigation canal, approximately 200 yards downstream from the worksite. The official investigation concluded that Krause had either fallen or deliberately entered the water and drowned. The water depth at that point was approximately 4 feet. The current was moderate but manageable. Krause was a documented swimmer. He had grown up near a river in Germany and had received lifeguard training in his youth. The circumstances of his death were never adequately explained. Some prisoners believed Krause had been attempting to escape and drowned accidentally. Others suggested he had taken his own life, despondent over separation from his family. But there was a third theory. one that was never officially recorded. Several prisoners claimed that Krause had been behaving strangely in the days before his death, talking to himself, mentioning that he needed to find something he had lost, refusing to explain what he meant. One prisoner, a sergeant named Hans Vogel, later testified that Krause had told him he was being called to the mountains. When Vogel asked what he meant, Krause simply said, "They're waiting for me there." In March 1946, 3 months after the war's end, Papago Park was officially decommissioned. The prisoners had been repatriated to Europe. The structures were dismantled. The land was slated to return to civilian use, but a skeleton crew remained for several weeks to complete the shutdown process and secure the property. Corporal James Whitfield was part of that crew. On the night of March 17, 1946, he was conducting a final inspection of the perimeter when he saw the figure. It was standing near the location where Compound 1A had been. Most of the structures had already been removed. The fence posts remained, but the wire had been cut down. The figure was wearing a prisoner's uniform. It was facing the Papago buttes. Whitfield approached to approximately 30 feet. He called out. The figure turned. Whitfield later stated he recognized the face from photographs in the camp archives. He was certain it was Otto Krause. The figure looked directly at Whitfield. Then it turned and began walking toward the mountains. Whitfield followed. He pursued the figure for approximately 400 yards, into the rocky terrain at the base of the buttes. The moon was bright. Visibility was good. The figure stopped at a large boulder, knelt down, and appeared to be digging at the ground with its hands. Whitfield called out again. The figure looked up at him. Its expression was desperate, pleading. Then it vanished. Whitfield searched the area for over an hour. He found nothing. The next morning, he returned to the location with 2 other soldiers. They excavated the area where the figure had been digging. 18 inches below the surface, they found a small metal box. Inside the box was a collection of personal items: photographs, letters, a pocket watch, a wedding ring. The items were identified through serial numbers and handwriting analysis. They had belonged to Otto Krause. How they came to be buried in that location was never determined. Krause had never been assigned to work details in that area. He had no authorized access to that section of the camp perimeter. The items were forwarded to the International Red Cross and eventually returned to Krause's family in Germany. After March 1946, the sightings stopped. The land that once housed Papago Park was gradually developed. Parts of it became a municipal park. Other sections were absorbed into the Phoenix metropolitan area. The Arizona National Guard established facilities on a portion of the property, but the area near the Papago Buttes, where Corporal Whitfield found the buried box, remained largely undeveloped. It's rocky, difficult terrain, not suitable for construction. In 1978, a group of hikers reported seeing a figure in outdated military clothing near the buttes. Local police investigated but found nothing. In 1995, a security guard at the nearby Phoenix Zoo, which borders the old camp location, reported seeing a man in what looked like a vintage uniform walking along the perimeter fence at 0200 hours. The figure disappeared before the guard could approach. There have been occasional reports since then. Never frequent, never predictable, always at night, always in the same general area. I spent 2 weeks in Phoenix researching this story. I interviewed historians, examined military archives, and spoke with descendants of both the guards and the prisoners who were at Papago Park. On my last night there, I hiked into the area near the Papago Buttes. I reached the approximate location where Corporal Whitfield found the buried box. The coordinates are in his original report. It was 0230 hours. The temperature was cool. The sky was clear. I stood there for 30 minutes, watching, listening. I saw nothing unusual. The desert was quiet. The city lights of Phoenix glowed in the distance. But I'll tell you this, standing there, in that empty desert, I felt something I've never felt at any other location I've investigated. I felt like I was intruding, like I was standing in a place where something profoundly personal had occurred. Something that wasn't meant for observers. I can't explain it. I can only report it. So what really happened at Papago Park between 1944 and 1946? The skeptical explanation is straightforward. Psychological stress, isolation, long hours, night watch duty in a high-security facility during wartime. The human mind under stress can create convincing hallucinations. Mass suggestion can spread false memories among groups. But this doesn't explain the physical evidence. The buried box, the consistent descriptions across multiple independent witnesses, the fact that sightings stopped after the box was recovered and returned to Krause's family. Some researchers suggest Otto Krause did attempt an escape, succeeded in hiding personal items he valued, but drowned while trying to return to camp. His apparent drowning in the irrigation canal was actually a desperate attempt to cover his escape route. Perhaps he intended to fake his death and return later. But this requires us to believe Krause swam or walked 400 yards to bury a box, then returned to drown in 4 feet of water. It doesn't add up. The alternative explanation is one that many people find difficult to accept. That Otto Krause, separated from everything he loved, died far from home in a desert he never wanted to see. That something essential to his identity remained here, unable to rest, searching for the last physical connections to the life he had lost. And that when those items were finally found and returned to his family, he could finally let go. In 2003, the German War Graves Commission installed a small memorial at the Phoenix Pioneer and Military Memorial Park, honoring the German and Italian prisoners of war who died in Arizona during World War II. Otto Krause's name is on that memorial. I visited it. It's a simple stone marker, dignified and respectful. Standing there, I thought about a young man who died thousands of miles from home, in a war he didn't start, in circumstances that were never fully explained. And I thought about Corporal James Whitfield, who saw something in the desert that night in 1946 that he never forgot, never doubted, and couldn't explain. Before he died in 1987, Whitfield gave one final interview about the incident. The interviewer asked him if he believed in ghosts. Whitfield was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I know what I saw. I know it was Otto Krause. And I know that when I found that box and we sent those things back to his family, I felt something change. Like a weight had been lifted from that place. Like something that had been wrong was finally made right. Make of that what you will." The Papago Park prisoner of war camp no longer exists. The land has moved on. The war that brought those men to Arizona is now part of history. But on certain nights, if you stand in the desert near those ancient volcanic buttes, you might understand why some people believe that not everything from the past stays in the past. Some things remain. Some things wait. Some things, maybe, just need to be found. This has been an investigation into the unexplained incidents at Papago Park between 1944 and 1946. All information presented is based on military records, witness testimony, and historical documentation. The mystery remains unsolved. On the night of October 14, 1943, something extraordinary happened in the skies above the remote Cascade Mountain Range in eastern Oregon. What began as a routine night training flight would become one of the most documented yet unexplained phenomena of World War II. This is the story of the Foo Fighters. Not the rock band you might be thinking of, but something far stranger. Something that has never been adequately explained, despite decades of military investigation, eyewitness testimony, and declassified documents. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and what you're about to hear is based entirely on military records, pilot testimonies, and official reports that remained classified for over 30 years. In the autumn of 1943, the United States Army Air Forces established a classified night training facility deep in the wilderness of Oregon, approximately 40 miles west of the town of Pendleton. The location was chosen for its isolation. The nearest civilian population was over 20 miles away, and the rugged terrain of the Blue Mountains provided natural concealment. The facility was officially designated Training Base Echo 7, though it appeared on no public maps. Its purpose was to prepare fighter pilots for night operations over Europe, where they would soon face German aircraft in darkness. Lieutenant Daniel Kern was 23 years old, a farm boy from Iowa with just over 200 hours of flight time. His co-pilot that night was Second Lieutenant Robert Lawson, 25, from Pennsylvania. Both men were considered by their commanding officers to be reliable, level-headed, and mechanically competent. Their training flight on October 14th was scheduled to depart at 2100 hours. The mission was straightforward, a 3-hour navigation exercise through predetermined waypoints over the Cascade Range, practicing instrument flight and night visual identification protocols. The weather that evening was clear. Visibility was excellent. Temperature at altitude, -12 degrees Celsius. At 21:47 hours, approximately 47 minutes into their flight, Lieutenant Kern radioed the control tower at Echo 7. The transmission was logged and later transcribed. The tower recording captured his words exactly. Quote, "Echo 7, this is Falcon 2. We have visual contact with an unidentified luminous object. Request confirmation of other aircraft in our sector." End quote. The controller, Staff Sergeant Michael Brennan, checked his logbook. No other aircraft were scheduled in that airspace. He responded, "Falcon 2, negative. Your sector is clear. Can you describe what you're seeing?" There was a pause. 5 seconds of static. Then Lieutenant Kern's voice returned, noticeably different, tighter, more controlled. Quote, "It's a sphere, bright orange, approximately 50 yards off our starboard wing. It's pacing us." End quote. Sergeant Brennan would later testify that he initially assumed the pilots were seeing the planet Venus, a common misidentification during night flights. He instructed them to maintain course and continue observation. But what happened next eliminated any possibility of a celestial object. At 21:49 hours, Lieutenant Lawson took over the radio. Quote, "Echo 7, the object just changed position. It moved from starboard to port in approximately 2 seconds. No aircraft can maneuver like that. We're at 240 knots. This thing is matching our speed exactly." End quote. The object remained with them for 11 minutes. According to both pilots' testimony, it maintained a fixed distance of approximately 40 to 60 yards from their aircraft. It made no sound. It emitted no exhaust trail. When they attempted evasive maneuvers, climbing and banking, the object adjusted its position instantaneously. Then, at 2200 hours, it simply vanished, not gradually, not by flying away. One moment it was there, the next, it was gone. Lieutenant Kern and Lieutenant Lawson returned to base at 23:40 hours. They were immediately separated and interviewed independently by intelligence officers. Their accounts matched in every significant detail. A formal report was filed. It was classified secret and forwarded to Army Air Forces intelligence in Washington, D.C. But this was only the beginning. Over the next 6 weeks, between October 14th and November 28, 1943, 17 separate sightings of similar luminous objects were reported by pilots training at Echo 7. The objects were described consistently across multiple independent witnesses: spherical or disc-shaped, colors ranging from orange to bright white to pale blue. Diameter estimated between 3 and 8 feet, capable of sudden acceleration and instantaneous directional changes. Always observed during night operations. Never detected on ground-based radar. The military's response was methodical. They ruled out known phenomena systematically. Weather balloons? None were launched in the area during the sightings. Flares or tracer rounds from ground exercises. No training exercises involving pyrotechnics were conducted on those dates. Ball lightning? Atmospheric conditions did not support this phenomenon, and ball lightning does not maintain a fixed relative position to moving aircraft. Enemy aircraft? In 1943, no German or Japanese aircraft had the range to reach Oregon, and the object's flight characteristics exceeded any known technology. By late November, the situation had escalated sufficiently that the War Department dispatched a specialized investigation team to Echo 7. The team was led by Major Edmund Schultz, an aeronautical engineer with a background in physics, and Captain Helen Cordova, a meteorologist. Their investigation lasted 3 weeks. On the night of December 2, 1943, Major Schultz himself witnessed the phenomenon. He was observing a training flight from the control tower when the pilot, Captain James Morton, reported an object pacing his aircraft. Major Schultz immediately went outside with binoculars. His official report, declassified in 1975, states the following, quote, "At 22:15 hours, I observed through 7x50 binoculars a luminous, spherical object, orange in color, maintaining position approximately 100 yards to the east of Captain Morton's aircraft. The object was clearly visible against the night sky. It moved in perfect synchronization with the aircraft through several turns and altitude changes. After approximately 8 minutes, the object accelerated vertically at what I estimate to be several thousand miles per hour and disappeared from view within 2 seconds. No sound was associated with this acceleration." End quote. Major Schultz was a trained observer. His testimony carried weight, and yet he could not explain what he had seen. Captain Helen Cordova took a different approach. Rather than focusing on what the objects were, she focused on when and where they appeared. She created a detailed chart of every sighting, noting time of occurrence, location coordinates, weather conditions, phase of the moon, aircraft type and flight path. A pattern emerged. Every sighting occurred in a specific geographic area, a roughly circular zone approximately 30 miles in diameter, centered over the remote Ochoco National Forest. Within this zone, sightings clustered around 3 particular locations, forming what Cordova described as a triangle of activity. All sightings occurred between the hours of 2100 and 0300. All occurred on nights with clear or partly cloudy skies. And here's what made Captain Cordova's findings truly strange. The 3 locations corresponded to areas where there were no military installations, no towns, and no roads. They were among the most isolated, inaccessible parts of the forest. She recommended a ground investigation. On December 18, 1943, a team of 12 soldiers, led by First Lieutenant Charles Hewitt, hiked into the Ochoco National Forest to investigate the primary location, a remote valley the pilots had designated Site Alpha. The team carried surveying equipment, radiation detection devices, primitive by today's standards, but state-of-the-art for 1943, cameras, and enough supplies for a 5-day expedition. What they found was documented in a 23-page report that remained classified until 1982. The valley was accessed by a narrow game trail that showed no evidence of recent human activity. The terrain was heavily forested with Douglas fir and ponderosa pine. The floor of the valley was relatively flat, approximately 300 yards wide and half a mile long. On the afternoon of December 19th, the team discovered something unusual. In a clearing near the center of the valley, they found an area of approximately 40 feet in diameter where the vegetation was dead. Not burned, not cut, simply dead. The grass and small plants were gray and brittle. Trees at the perimeter showed dead branches on the side facing the center of the circle. Soil samples were collected. Lieutenant Hewitt noted in his report that the soil felt unusually dry and granular, despite recent rainfall in the area. The team's radiation detection equipment registered slightly elevated readings at the center of the circle, approximately 20% above background levels. Not dangerous, but anomalous. They set up observation posts and waited. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th night, December 22nd, at 22:37 hours, Private First Class Raymond Oakes, who was on watch at the northern observation post, called out to the others. According to the report, Private Oakes observed a luminous phenomenon approximately 200 feet above the clearing. He described it as a sphere of orange-white light, roughly 6 feet in diameter, descending slowly. The object reached an altitude of approximately 50 feet above the clearing and remained stationary for an estimated 3 to 4 minutes. No sound was heard, no heat was felt. The object then ascended rapidly and disappeared from view. All 12 members of the team witnessed this event. Lieutenant Hewitt attempted to photograph it, but the extreme low light conditions and the limitations of 1943 camera technology resulted in photographs that showed only a blurred, luminous spot. The object did not return that night. The team remained for 1 more day, then hiked out on December 24th, Christmas Eve. By January 1944, the investigation at Echo 7 had generated over 600 pages of documentation. Testimony from 47 pilots and crew members, photographs and film footage of poor quality but consistent content, soil samples, radiation measurements, engineering analyses. The War Department's conclusion, delivered in a classified memorandum dated January 31st, 1944, was remarkable for its candor. The document stated, "The phenomena observed by personnel at Training Base Echo 7 cannot be attributed to any known aircraft, atmospheric conditions, or natural phenomena. The objects display flight characteristics beyond current technological capabilities. No evidence suggests enemy activity. No conventional explanation is adequate. The phenomena remain unidentified. Investigation is suspended pending further incidents." In other words, they didn't know. And perhaps more significantly, they were willing to admit it. But the story doesn't end there. Training operations at Echo 7 continued through April 1944. Sightings decreased in frequency, but did not stop entirely. The last documented sighting at Echo 7 occurred on April 3, 1944, observed by Lieutenant Sarah Brennan, one of the women Air Force service pilots who had been assigned to the base. Then, in late 1944, American and British pilots flying combat missions over Germany and occupied Europe began reporting identical phenomena. They called them Foo Fighters, a term borrowed from a popular comic strip of the era, where foo was a nonsense word meaning something mysterious or magical. Hundreds of Allied pilots reported seeing the luminous spheres during night missions. The objects paced their aircraft, sometimes for minutes at a time, then vanished. They never attacked. They never interfered with operations. They simply observed. The Germans saw them too. After the war, captured German pilots confirmed they had witnessed the same phenomena and had assumed they were Allied secret weapons. Both sides thought the objects belonged to the enemy. Neither was correct. Training Base Echo 7 was decommissioned in June 1945, shortly after the end of the war in Europe. The facilities were dismantled. The cleared runways were allowed to return to forest. By 1950, almost no trace of the base remained. The reports were filed away, classified, forgotten. In 1975, following the Freedom of Information Act, researcher James Stevenson requested declassification of World War II-era UFO reports. The Echo 7 documents were among thousands of pages released. They received little media attention. The Cold War was in full swing. People were worried about Soviet missiles, not mysterious lights from 1943. But some researchers noticed. In 1989, a team from Oregon State University conducted a field expedition to the Ochoco National Forest, attempting to locate Site Alpha using the coordinates from Lieutenant Hewitt's 1943 report. They found the valley, they found the clearing, and they found something that shouldn't have been there. The area of dead vegetation, the 40-foot diameter circle, was still visible. 46 years after Lieutenant Hewitt's team had documented it, nothing had grown back. The center of the circle remained barren. The surrounding forest was dense and healthy, but the circle was lifeless. Soil analysis in 1989 using modern techniques revealed something the 1943 tests could not have detected. The soil's crystalline structure had been altered at the molecular level, consistent with exposure to intense electromagnetic radiation or extreme heat, but without the chemical markers that burning would leave. It was as if the soil had been fundamentally changed by something. But by what? In the decades since, researchers have proposed numerous theories to explain the Foo Fighters of Echo 7. St. Elmo's fire, a weather phenomenon where atmospheric electricity creates luminous plasma around aircraft. But St. Elmo's fire doesn't maintain a fixed distance from aircraft, doesn't appear as distinct spherical objects, and doesn't occur under the clear atmospheric conditions reported in most sightings. Electromagnetic anomalies. The theory that natural geological formations in the area generated unusual electromagnetic fields that both created visual phenomena and affected pilots' perceptions. But this doesn't explain the physical evidence at Site Alpha or the consistency of observations across multiple independent witnesses. Secret military testing. Perhaps the most practical theory, that the U.S. military was testing some form of advanced technology, possibly early drone aircraft or remotely piloted luminous devices. But declassified records show no such technology existed in 1943, and no program has ever been revealed that matches the object's characteristics. The extraterrestrial hypothesis, that the objects were craft from another world, observing human military operations. This is, of course, the explanation that requires the most extraordinary evidence, and the evidence, while strange, is not conclusive. The truth is simpler and more frustrating. We don't know. In 2019, I had the privilege of interviewing retired Air Force Colonel Daniel Kern. Yes, the same Lieutenant Kern who made that first radio call on October 14, 1943. He was 99 years old, living in a retirement community in Arizona. His memory was sharp. His conviction was absolute. I asked him what he thought he saw that night, 76 years earlier. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I was a pilot for 40 years. I flew in 3 wars. I've seen everything there is to see in the sky. Weather phenomena, atmospheric tricks, optical illusions. I've seen them all. What I saw that night in 1943 was none of those things. It was a physical object. It was under intelligent control. And it was not built by any human beings. I don't know what it was. I don't know where it came from. But I know what I saw. And I know I wasn't alone." Colonel Daniel Kern passed away in February 2020 at the age of 100. He never stopped believing The Foo Fighters of Training Base Echo 7 remain one of the most thoroughly documented yet unexplained phenomena in military history. The witnesses were trained observers. The investigations were conducted by qualified personnel. The documentation exists in government archives. And yet, we have no answers. Site Alpha in the Ochoko National Forest remains accessible. The circle of dead soil, smaller now due to erosion but still visible, can still be found if you know where to look. The coordinates are in the public record. The forest is quiet. The sky above it looks like any other sky. But on certain clear nights, if you stand in that clearing and look up, you might wonder, are we alone in watching? Or is something, somewhere, still watching back? This has been an investigation into the Foo Fighters phenomenon of 1943. All information presented is based on declassified military documents, sworn testimony, and historical records. The mystery remains unsolved.